Welcome to the Value Investor TV podcast. This is the podcast that helps you grow your wealth and become financially independent. My name is Becco and my partner Hari.
Hello.
All right, in this episode, we are going to talk about Michaels. It's an interesting company, exciting company. In that it is quite undervalued. It is not a great business, but it is a mediocre business that is priced at a very attractive very attractive rate. So we'll talk more about that in this episode. Before we do, Hari, start us off with a disclaimer, please.
Yeah, this is the Value Investor TV podcast. We are a podcast that helps you understand the concepts behind value investing. We are not financial advisors. We don't know your specific financial situation. So please consult with the appropriate advisor before making any investment decisions.
Excellent. So it's been a while since we actually went through the checklist. So for those of you who are joining, who are new, we are going through our version of investors checklist. So we compiled a list of questions that we go through to evaluate a company, any company for that matter, and we're going to do that in this episode. So to start us off, I'm going to ask this first question on the checklist, which is, what does the company do? You should be able to answer this question in less than 2 sentences. I know I tend to go kind of overboard with this question when I'm on the receiving end of this question. But Hari, what does Michaels do?
So Michaels is the largest arts and crafts retailer in the United States.
Wow, nice, concise, very compressed.
Yep,
I like it.
That's how you got to roll. So I know that that's not the entire thing, but they operate almost 1,300 stores in 49 states, and they broke down their sales into 4 different categories: general crafts, home decor. So general crafts are about almost 50%. Home decor is 23%, custom framing 16%, and paper crafts 12%. So there's, for those of you who are kind of, not really into the arts and crafts kind of space, they are the largest retailer in the country. They cite Joann's, which sells a lot of fabric, and Hobby Lobby, which is a lot more home decor stuff, as their 2 biggest competitors. And they sell through their stuff through, most of it is actually 60% of their sales are through private label brands. So these are, they source these from China or other places, and then they sell it under their own store brand names like Creatology, Ashland, Artist Loft, and so on. So, and then they'll partner with popular brands to make store exclusives like Crayola and things like that. So, but if you have kids, if you have somebody who's craft oriented, they've probably been to Michaels or are a repeat buyer at Michaels.
What's the one state that it is not in?
I think it's Alaska.
Okay, I was gonna guess Hawaii. But.
Yeah, it may be Hawaii. It's one of those 2. Okay. But
okay,
your guess is as good as mine there. I'm not even entirely sure. So.
Okay, cool. Okay, sounds like it's a retail business that sells goods and good kind of home goods and things like that.
Yep.
Mixture of Hobby Lobby and some other retail stores.
Yeah.
Okay. What does the business have, or what does the business have a competitive advantage? Describe them in the categories below. So we'll just go through the list. Brand, network effects, switching cost, low cost, intangible asset. Any of those apply to Michaels?
Yeah, so I think brand is a big part of their quote unquote moat here. They have name recognition and a very large store base. So if you're in a major city, you're probably close to a Michaels. And their size is kind of what allows them to do, to be close to everybody. And the second part of that, I think, as you mentioned, there was there's no switching costs here. There's no network effects. But there is a benefit here in that because of their size, they're able to get somewhat of a discount. They have their private brands, so they're able to provide a low-cost kind of moat there. So I would say that those are the 2 big, big moats there, but I don't know that they're insurmountable, right? Obviously, Amazon and Walmart and stuff also sell crafts. The difference is that Amazon and Walmart don't have the size and scope of of what Michaels sells, right? So there's a lot of things that Michaels sells that are more tailored to the high end, person than the low end, right?
Hmm.
And so that's what the difference there is with the WalMarts of the world.
Hmm. So you think that the differentiating factor between them versus Amazon, for example, who sells everything online, is the fact that they carry more goods,
Yeah. So
more diverse goods?
yeah. So I think there's two things that I have never bought into the argument that Amazon is destroying retail businesses, right? I think retail businesses are destroying themselves because they failed to make their business competitive with Amazon, right? So what you saw in the 70s and 80s was Walmart kind of came in and they were this giant big box retailer. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
have people who were knowledgeable about what the goods were. They were just there to stock the shelves. And so a lot of these retail stores kind of cut their employees down to the level of equivalent of just stocking people because they thought it was, was to stock the shelves and that's it. So as we'll talk about, later, in the beginning of the pandemic, they fired their CEO and brought in a new guy who was actually from Walmart, but he was in charge of buying specialty goods. And he spent a lot of time interviewing customers, long-term Michaels employees, and what he found was there were a lot of people who wanted to like Michaels. The problem was that they would go into the store and it would be all kind of generic crap, for a lack of a better term. And so they would end up with a lot of store inventory that nobody wanted, but they were buying it at a huge discount. So what he did was he kind of started identifying the brands and things like that people wanted, and then adjusting to their needs and listening to them. And as we'll talk about, there's a huge uptick in sales, huge uptick in the number of people that came into the store or bought online and picked up in the store, which are two things that they didn't do very well prior to, this new CEO coming on. So what I would say is that the turnaround here that's occurring is that this business is actually something that people had fond memories of. They would walk down the aisle and look at. But think about it, when you're doing a craft project, you don't have you set aside Saturday afternoon to do that. You go and you find, oh, I'm missing this piece, or wouldn't it be nice if I added this? So you go and buy it on Amazon. It's going to take 2 days to show up. Well, you've lost your craft time window to do that, that project. Instead, you get in the car, you drive to Michael's. You can walk down the aisles and you can actually get, just by looking and browsing, get an idea of what you're missing, right? And things that are, it sparks your interest. You can find other things. Now, the other thing that's kind of ties into this is we have now Etsy and Pinterest, right? Which kind of create other people, other makers are showing off their stuff. And now you have a lot more ideas that then Michaels can harvest that data. They can use that to, do that. So their big push, Michael's big push, is we need to find the people who are makers, which make up almost half of our customers, 40% or so, and cater to them because they're the people who do multiple projects per year, and not cater so much to the people who are doing the home decor and decor and stuff like that, which is a smaller percentage of our business, and really focus on the people who are going to take their stuff and then put it on Etsy or put it on, Pinterest and stuff like that, right?
Interesting.
So
That's super interesting.
Yeah, it's a big shift in their business model, and I think a good one, right? Because I think that creates some stickiness because now your customers are going to come back to you. But there's another level of this which they haven't executed on yet, which is you make stuff with Michaels and then you sell your stuff at Michaels Marketplace to other people who want to buy crafts and things like that. So it's kind of a competitor to Etsy, but more of it's a one-stop shop, right? I go to buy the items that I need, and then I can sell finished items in the same place.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. So a couple points I want to highlight there is one, competition with Amazon. one of the things that is interesting, what protects a retailer from Amazon being Amazoned or any of these e-commerce kind of steamrolling your business? I think a key part of why Michaels could have a good chance of doing that is because, kind of to your point, it's a specialty store that they only produce. It's like a very specialized product and services that you. So that's number one. Another characteristic there is you need to kind of touch and feel and kind of see it for yourself.
Yep.
These are things that are hard to do online. So if you have those two characteristics combined, I think that is a kind of a moat against e-commerce just steamrolling your business. One point, and then the second point is kind of this upstream provider to online storefronts of Etsy for makers, right? So makers would source their products and goods from Michaels and then put it together, and then they could sell it through Michaels storefront or through Etsy. So that sort of that sliver of demographic there that they're targeting makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and I think obviously there's risks, right, with kind of that execution, right? But
Hmm.
the difference here is that Michaels has a retail store base that even if they don't execute on that marketplace idea, if they just clean up their sales a little bit, right, you're going to see huge bumps in cash flow, earnings, and so forth. And that's what we will talk about when we get to the financials, is that during the pandemic, a lot of people were stuck at home, so they turned to doing crafts, right? But I think what they realized is that I don't think this crafting kind of phenomenon is going to go away, right? Etsy isn't going to go away. Pinterest, these kind of services, there's a lot of interest in people in a digital world wanting to do things with their hands, touching, feeling, that kind of stuff. And it's a great way to spend time with your kids. It's a great way to turn off the digitalness of the world, right? So I don't think that's going to go away. And I think the strength that they have is that if you make a good store, right? I'll use an example of this, and you may not have one locally next to you, is Micro Center, right? But Micro Center is a retailer of electronics, computer parts, and so forth. They're a specialty retailer, just like Michaels is for arts and crafts. They are for computer stuff. And they are killing it in the pandemic. I will routinely go there on Saturdays for just picking up USB keys or something, whatever I'm trying to get. And the line is out the door, right? It's wrapping around the store and things like that. And it's because they're a specialty retailer. They have very knowledgeable salespeople. They're very friendly. They have the item in stock. If you remove the word Micro Center and put Michaels in there, you would hear exactly the same thing, is that there is there's a huge demand for being able to go into the store, look at it and touch it, feel it, see it, and so forth. And to be able to get it that day, right? Micro Center, even less so that the touch and feel part of it, right? Because it's a computer board or, a motherboard or CPU or whatever. You don't really need to look at it. But Michaels, I think, is even, better with that.
More.
Yeah, more
Yeah.
so that, and I will tell you, as a kid growing up, just to kind of bring home this point and then we'll move on. Like, I grew up going to Toys R Us, right? Toys R Us was a fantastic store, right? It was a great place if you were a kid because there was just this sense of wonder that you could walk through there and see all of these things. Obviously, as your parents would hate it, right? Because they you'd be asking for stuff all the time, right? But I was lucky enough to take my older daughter to Toys R Us before they closed, and she was just blown away by it. And you can't get that at Target or Walmart because they have one or two aisles dedicated to toys. And the real problem with it is that Toys R Us was not failing because they were failing because they had way too much debt. As we'll see, this is a common story that we'll find out with Michaels, is they're poorly managed, poorly run. You have these hired gun CEOs who don't even care about the business. They're going to get a golden parachute, right? Even if they do a terrible job. And as a result of that, you are seeing a business that, we are seeing these specialty stores falling apart where Amazon, I think, actually has no competitive moat in these specialty industries. They just have their size and their scope and their convenience, right? But when you need help with a project or a craft or whatever, it's so much easier to walk in and look at it, right? And touch it and so forth. And they can't replicate that.
Hmm. I think the I think th- I think the sort of the mental framework that I have in mind is, you have an spectrum of goods. You have, on one hand, very, very specialized goods and services, and then on the other hand, straight up commodity, right? Pen and pencil,
Yep.
right? And so pen and pencil, you don't need to go to, you don't need to walk into a retail store to look at how it feels, things like that. That like things on this side of the spectrum can be easily e-commerced, if you will.
Yep.
Things on this side of the spectrum cannot be. And I think Michael, being that specialty store, operates on the other end of that spectrum, therefore protected by just by the nature of what they carry, protected by just being Amazon or Walmart steamrolling them with their e-commerce engine. So that makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to the next question. How durable is the competitive advantage? I think we kind of talked about that.
Yeah.
What are the risks to the current competitive advantage? Anything to add there?
Yeah. So I think the two things that I think are their risks are, the Joann's and the Hobby Lobbies are going to, may also glom on to what Michael's is doing and kind of, take some of their business. I don't know that that's a huge risk because they kind of operate in their own little niches, right? And I've heard from people that, if you have a Hobby Lobby near you, that's where you go. If you have a Michael's near you, that's where you go. So Michael's is kind of tapped out in terms of the number of stores it can open, right? They're very close to that theoretical max, right? They can't open up more new stores. They may close some old ones, but it'll be net zero, going forward. So really, I think the biggest threat to them is failure to execute, right? If they don't keep listening to their customer and don't have the right product mix, people are just not going to want to go to the store, right? So it's a lack of interest that I think is their biggest risk. And I think so far the new CEO is executing well, but they may fail to continue to execute well. I think that's the biggest risk to them.
Execution risk. Makes sense. Okay, next is, what are the company's long-term prospects and run rate for growth?
So
I think we sort of touched on it with long-term prospects, run rate for growth. What do you think?
yeah, so very limited amount in the growth. During their investor day, they kind of hinted at maybe 1% to 2% growth in the next few years. So the story here is not a growth story, right? That as we'll see as we talk about finances and stuff like that, is clean up the business, make more of the money flow to the bottom line, and then let's fix some of the financial issues, and then we have a cash flow machine. So that's the story that we'll pitch here very soon.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Not a growth story here.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question: does the company require a lot of capital reinvestment to maintain its business?
No. So the biggest capital that they reinvestment they're doing is to refurbish stores. In terms of their cash flow, their free cash flow is generating $400 or $500 million a year. Or, I'm sorry, operating cash flow is about $500 million a year, and about 80 to 100 million in maintenance capex. So there may be some investment in this marketplace thing. There may be some investment in more e-commerce work, but for the most part, I think e-commerce is already going strong, and a lot of their customers are in store or are using the e-commerce platform. So I really don't think that there's a lot of so reinvestment here is not going to be a big issue.
So you're talking about 10 to 20% of free cash flow.
Yeah. And as we'll talk about, that free cash flow number may actually increase significantly, but the maintenance capex will stay the same.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Okay. Last question for this podcast, for this episode. Does the company have favorable relationships with the following: customer, suppliers, employees, regulators? Any red flags that you've noticed?
Yeah, I think the only risk I would say is that their customer base may not be aware of how much better the store is at this point, right?
Hmm.
So what's interesting to me is that Michaels in their marketing database has almost 24 million people. And I think they say their entire market is about 40 million people, right? So they already
Hmm.
have a huge chunk of the people in their marketing emails, right? So
About half,
yeah,
more than half.
more than half. So how do they clean up the image, of people who are been, long-term shoppers? Maybe the last time they went into Michael's was 2 years ago and walked out frustrated because they didn't have the inventory of, whatever they were looking for, right? So I think that's the biggest risk to them, is that they don't keep the customer at top of mind. As we've said before, if they lose the interest of the customer, then the whole thing falls apart. So
Hmm. Makes sense. All right, that sort of wraps it up. That does wrap it up for this episode. Um, and we'll pick this up. We'll pick this up in the next episode, where we will talk about the financial, the management, and the valuation, which is the fun part of going down this checklist, especially for a company like this. Um, so please tune in for the next episode. And just a couple more housekeeping items. If you guys would like a copy of this checklist, please email us at info@valueinvestor.org. And as Hari mentioned in the previous episode, we are opening up our Patreon page and posting our videos on YouTube. So if you, first of all, if you would sort of, we would let you know when the Patreon page is up. Any sort of help on that front would help us tremendously to continue to produce content for you guys. And then also from YouTube standpoint, if you guys could also take a look at our YouTube channel, that would be super helpful as well. So uh, thanks again for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.
yeah, and just one last thing to add before we go. If you are on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. That really helps us push the algorithm to get us onto the front page, so we get more clicks, more views, more people, and then we produce more content for you guys. So we'd really appreciate it if you
Awesome.
can do that.
Great. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks.